57 Buttonwood Drive, Jackson, Tennessee 38305. Bob's phone number is area code 901-424-4164. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing on October 30th, 1990. This is tape number 1 of 1 tape. Okay, perhaps you would just start with your name and your address and your phone number for us, if you would, please.
Yes, my name is Robert Wagner, and our address is 157 Buttonwood Drive, Jackson, Tennessee. Our phone,
What's the zip down?
the zip down there is 38305.
All right, good.
And the phone number is 901, is the area code,
Okay.
424-4164.
All right, very good.
And back in the summer of 1940, when I was still in high school, I would occasionally go and pick up Mrs. Olds and take her, when the Olds lived in the corner of Washington Avenue and Main Street. It was rather interesting because you'd drive into their driveway and up toward their garage where they kept their cars, there was a turntable in the middle of the drive. You'd drive onto this turntable and get out and take the bumper of your car and turn it around so that you could drive straight back out onto Washington Avenue. And then at that time, I would take these ladies and take them out to the Lansing Country Club, usually for a luncheon or to play cards or something like that, the bridge club that they belonged to.
Using their car?
Using Mrs. Briggs's car.
Okay.
Mrs. Ada Briggs. And
Were they all in that house there, Bob?
no, Mrs. Briggs lived over on
But not there, anyway.
no, she didn't live there. One block west of Capitol Avenue. It goes down past the Ad building.
Oh, west of Capitol.
Yeah, west of Capitol, and it's
Let's see, that's not Walnut.
no,
Walnut's two block, Townsend.
Townsend Street. She lived on Townsend Street, right between Washtenaw and Kalamazoo Street.
Okay.
And
So when you
They-
pull up into the driveway, you wheel up in the driveway, park on the turntable, go out and turn the car around.
right, that was an interesting at that
Did
time.
it turn easy?
Oh yeah, it turned real easy. You know,
I'll be darned.
just take it by the one hand and turn it around.
Isn't that a...
And it was rather interesting to do that, you know, and especially as a young kid chauffeuring the money peoples of Lansing around, you might say,
Yeah.
because the Olds and the Scotts and the Briggses were the main money people in the city of Lansing back in the early 40s or 30s and back in there.
Yeah.
And
Now, did you get to meet Mr. Olds at all at that time?
no, he had passed away
He
at
had
that
gone
time.
by that.
He was passed away by that time.
All right.
And so
This was in 1940?
this was in the summer of 1940.
1940, okay.
Mhm.
All right.
So it was a fun thing, and I've always remembered, you know, and I wished at that time I would have been. We would have thought about taking pictures and doing some of these things to have the picture of Mrs. Olds and taking them these places, and I'm sure at that time they would not have, you know, minded at all to have done that.
Yeah.
So it's. And I had talked to Mike Pierce as we were working together over on 28 block floor at one time, and I told him that, you know, what had happened there, and that probably I was the only one at GM that had ever chauffeured her around, and had the occasion to meet her and do this sort of thing, and I thoroughly enjoyed it at that time, you know, as a
Can you remember
as a
what
young
kind
kid.
of a lady she was?
Well, she was a very, very neat, nice person, you know. All of those people were that way.
Were they?
The Scotts and the Briggs, and they were all real nice people. And it it so happened that after this period of time, and I was no longer doing odd jobs, as you might say. I had gone into service in 1942 in the Army, and this Mrs. Briggs had a piano in her house, and soon after I got back from, I think it was soon after I got back from overseas, Mrs. Briggs had passed away, and it ended up then through her estate and everything that the piano she had in her house ended up in our house through a intermarriage relationship and this sort of thing. That and we had that right up until 3 years ago when after I retired from Oldsmobile from 18 plus years, and we moved to Tennessee. We finally sold the piano rather than to have to move it down there. And it was rather interesting what some of the things that have developed out of that. And
See, Bob, tell me a little bit about your working experience at the plant. What did you do there?
I hired in and went down to the warehouse that you had on Washington and Mount Hope. Was down there for just about a month. And then, of course, that was about the time somebody wanted to bump me out of there, because that was a pretty good deal.
Do you remember what year that was?
69, the fall of, yeah.
Okay.
I hired in 9/9/69.
All right.
And so then I come back and I worked on the motor line for Jim Smith. He was my supervisor at that time.
Okay. What were you doing down there?
I was on inspection.
You were on
inspection and checking head bolts on a motor assembly.
Yeah.
And checking head bolts and make sure those were all tight and all that kind of thing that went on. And then I ended up transferring over to the block floor, which was 38 block floor. And during those times, it was when they'd have a layoff or they'd do something, and then maybe you'd be sent up to gas tanks, or then I'd get back to the block floor. And I guess I worked for Mike Haynes most of my time. And he ended up over on 28 after they closed out 38. He ended up over on 28, and I worked for him over there for a while. And
still on inspection, were you?
no, I was on production. I had switched over to production, and I had not been on inspection only just a year or so. And then I transferred over, and I was on per diem for a couple, 3 weeks or something. And so then...
what were you doing on the block line in 38? What kind, were you running a machine operator?
69, on 38,
yeah.
pounding caps, and I was line repair and relief.
All right.
Most of the time that I was over on 38. And then I did the same thing over on 28. And then it was about the time they kept talking about taking the V8s away and all that sort of thing. So then I went to work for Mike Pierce, not Mike Pierce, but Mike Adams, when they started up the new V6 head assembly. And I worked on head assembly over there, on production. And that's where I retired from, was 28 head assembly. So, well, I guess that's about the story that I can give you at the present time.
All right.
And or else, do you have any questions that I might?
Well, that's good. Nice remembrance there. So, but can you describe the house at all that Mrs. Olds had? What it looked like?
Well, it's a large a red brick home that's set right on the corner up there, and as I can recall, you drove into the driveway, which would be on the north side of the house, and of course the house faced the east, and ran right along the corner of Main Street right there, and up the street in the next block, the O'Connors lived up there. The O'Connors were a family that had run a clothing store here in town for many years, and my mother's sister ended up marrying George O'Connor, and they lived up in the next block there for with Mrs. O'Connor for quite some time until finally she passed away, and then of course they disposed of that house and that sort of thing. But I came to Lansing in the Christmas of 1927 at the age of 7 years old.
And was the little Scott Park up on the corner?
Oh, yes.
At that time in 40 when you were doing
that was all part of their the Scott's mansion, you might say, that they had up there. And I happened to know Morris Scott at one time. He was the son, and he was a jewelry salesman. He sold diamonds, wholesale diamond salesman. And this was back around 1939 at that time that that I recall him doing that. And so it's so I lived in Lansing somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 years or so. And maybe even a little bit longer than that. At one time I left and went to Columbus, Ohio for 5 years. And then when I came back in September of '69 and went to work for Oldsmobile and lived here until I retired.
Do you remember what you made when you hired in at the plant?
No, it was like $3 and something an hour. And left at 13 something. I don't recall exactly, 13 in some odd cents right there. But it was a real pleasant experience, and my only regret, I guess, is that I had not done that many years before that. And because I thoroughly enjoyed working here, and I had some excellent supervisors, and Bill Schraben and Mike Haynes, and I sure had a good time and met so many nice people. And matter of fact, when I leave here now, I'm going to go over to Plant 1 and go in and see some of the fellows over there. And I did in January, but most of them were on vacation at that because you had a weekend, an extra weekend there. And so, and then our son works over to 150. He's a clerk over in 150 on the afternoon shift over there. And Bill has worked for Oldsmobile about 12 years now. And so, then we have a daughter-in-law who works for ADS, and if I'm not mistaken, her office might be over in 40. I'm not sure, upstairs in 40 over there. So.
Okay, Bob. Well, nice job.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and kind of give you a little bit of my past right there. So,
I'm going to click this thing off.
Okay.